Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. Happy holiday season to everyone. Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa coming up. And I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Martin Looney and Len Fasano make New Haven and Connecticut tick. Marty represents New Haven in the Connecticut State Senate. A Democrat, he serves as the Chamber's president pro tem. And Len is the Senate's leading Republican. And believe it or not, they do show up in the same room. They do get along. They do adjust each other's mics, and they do try to govern. They know how to disagree and how to make laws and keep government running. As we slog into 2020, they face a challenge on that front, figuring out where to find billions, if I have that number right, to fix our roads and bridges and public transit, and how to navigate that four-letter word. Ready? Harry says we could say this according to the FCC, tolls. Actually, that's 5 letters. Okay. They're here in the WNHH studio for trial run. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be with you, Paul.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming back, and thanks to New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, folks, I thought that by the end of 2019, we were supposed to have a vote on this. Governor Lamont said we need a lot of money to fix our transportation system. Everyone agrees it's broken. You guys had each had your plans you put up there. And we were told that there'd be a vote by the end of the year about whether to put tolls so that we could capture all that revenue leaving our state on other highways. What happened?
Well, there have been a variety of plans that have been offered, and the latest one that I think that reflects a consensus on the Democratic side is a more modest version of the plan that Governor Lamont ran on in 2018, which is tolls on trucks on a limited number of bridges, on 12 bridges. You recall his plan in the general election campaign of 18 was tolls on trucks only, but more widely based on roads throughout the state. So this is a modest portion of what had been his original plan.
And he said, hey, I looked at it, and this is what I really thought all along, but I'll pretend I just came up with this. We should toll everybody because that's what other states do. 40% of the revenue will come from people from out of state, and we really can't pay the bill without it. He did say that for a while, right?
He did. Well, that was the plan that but ultimately there was not support for tolling on passenger vehicles. And what I saw in terms of talking to people about this is that support for tolls overall, whether it be cars or trucks, was strongest in Fairfield County, where they experienced the most congestion on a daily basis. The farther east you went, there was less support for tolls. But also, there was also a difference, I think, among people who traveled regularly in other states and paid taxes in Massachusetts and in New York were recognized the fact that they paid taxes there and
tolls.
Pay tolls, and their residents don't pay taxes, don't pay tolls when they come to Connecticut. So they saw an equity in that. But I think people who don't travel as much didn't quite see it that way. So now we're focused on trucks only tolls, with the argument there that it will bring in some revenue from out-of-state sources and also will provide some revenue to our state from those who impose the greatest wear and tear on our roads, the heavy trucks.
And Haji Bey Chadabashalu, thanks for weighing in, Haji. We got a question. Haji, I want to put your question on hold a little bit because we're talking about tolls first, but we'll definitely ask it in this hour. It's a very good question. And thanks for listening to Dateline New Haven. So, Len Fasano, turning to you, you're the leading Senate Republican. I believe it was you who pointed out that in Rhode Island right now, they had a plan to tax only trucks, tolls only for trucks, and that's been challenged, and there's a court case that it might make it through. So am I accurately quoting you saying that why would we go ahead with a plan that might be knocked down anyway and go through all that service?
Correct. Currently, there is a lawsuit that the Truck Association brought saying you can't toll just trucks. It's interfering with interstate commerce. They lost it at the lower court. Federal court went to the higher court. Court said this is not a taxing issue. It is a tolling issue. It does affect interstate commerce. Sent it back down for further analysis.
Now, I'm not a lawyer. You guys are lawyers. I can't figure out why, if you're already allowed to have different rates of tolling for trucks and cars on interstate highway, why would you not be allowed to have a differential in taxing them?
Well, I think there was a difference on federal and state jurisdiction. The original case that was brought in federal court was thrown out on the grounds that it should have been brought in state court, and then there was an appeal of that. And most recently, the Court of Appeals held that it could be brought in the federal court. So they have the option of pursuing it either way.
So it already is, Len, right?
But that's because the issue was it was brought in the wrong court initially because the argument was it was a tax, which is an interesting argument for Lamont to argue and those who are pro tolls that this is not a tax, because the way Rhode Island said is, this is a tax. We're taxing out-of-state trucks. You don't have jurisdiction in the federal court. The federal court said yes. Truckers appealed and said, listen, you may call it a tax, but it affects interstate commerce. Therefore, it does have a federal implication. And that court said, you're right.
So, Marty, does Len have a point that you guys could be spending all this time about trying to get something passed that's going to have controversial debate, and then it might be all moot in the end because of this lawsuit, or is the lawsuit kind of not going to prevail?
We don't think it's going to prevail. We've talked to some of the people in the administration in Rhode Island that are confident that they're going to prevail on the grounds that they believe that truck tolling is something that can stand in its own merits, since most states do impose tolls on both cars and trucks, and that truckers will not be paying a toll in Connecticut that they don't pay in other states.
So, Len, do you think that Marty's right, that just as a lawyer, do you think that it's not going to prevail, or do you feel with your legislator hat that you really never know? So let's have a more solid basis on the transportation plan.
I think there's a couple things. One, I don't know. I haven't read the law. I haven't read their briefs in Canada. I've read what the court said, and nothing of the arguments to the court, either one, has been on the merits. It's been on what we call jurisdiction.
So
right?
We don't know the merits.
So we don't even know what the merits are per se. So that's number one. Number two, no matter what happens, there are many years of litigation to go. And the question is, let's assume we do this, trucks only.
You're saying it's inevitable it's going to be in the courts.
Inevitable. But let's just say we do it. And let's say the court in Rhode Island rules in favor of the trucking industry. Then what's going to happen? We all know what's going to happen. They're going to say it's unconstitutional just to do trucks. So it wasn't the legislature that wants to do this, but we got to do cars now. Don't blame us, blame the courts. Otherwise, we're going to be taking down hundreds of millions of dollars of apparatus and internet software and all the backup.
So that leads me to the next question, where I kind of see it as an outsider different from both of you. And we're talking to Len Fasano and Marty Looney, the two leaders of Republican Democrat in the state Senate, about tolls. So here's what it looks like to a biased person who's not in the legislature, which is that how much money overall do you guys agree about how much money is needed to fund transportation improvements in the state?
Sort of,
Pretty much. I think
what's our round number?
We're more or less in agreement. The governor has proposed a 10-year plan of, it was initially, I think, $21 billion. Now it would be about $19 billion, I guess, under the plan that he's talking about now. So I think there's rough agreement on that's a reasonable plan for the next 10 years.
So you guys agree we need $19 billion. We're not just talking about roads. We are, God forbid, talking about buses and trains, right?
Right.
So then we agree with that. So on the outside, I'm looking.
Well, I agree. It's roughly.
So now
19.
if you did tolls on everybody, like other states do, how much of that $19 billion would be covered over 10 years? Do you guys agree with the Office of Fiscal Analysis on a number?
Let's say that you could always reach 19 or 20 billion
depending what
dollars.
you charge.
But
what did they project in the governor's plan when he
talking about when they did
promoted
cars and tolls?
Yeah,
cars and trucks.
Was that the lion's share of the money?
It was, I believe. Yeah.
And then now trucks is what, like about a sixth of the money if you told just trucks?
I think the number there is now about a little under $200 million a year.
187
for the trucks number. Of course, the truck tolls would be higher than any contemplated earlier version on taxing passenger cars would be.
So that does cover the $19 billion.
Yes.
Okay. So what it's looking to be on the outside is why it seems kind of simple that we would do tolls. Why would you mess it up by bringing up trucks? Either you're going to try to use tolls the way other states do to pay for transportation because people are using roads, so we're going to fix the roads. 40% of it's free money. Is that the right number, 40%? That comes from people who don't live in the state?
Just about.
So why, if we all agree we have to fix the roads and transportation system, if we all agree it costs a lot of money, why not do it the way where we get 40% of it free and doesn't tie us up in a lawsuit about trucks that makes it hard to collect the money?
Because people don't trust government, period. That's all it is. They know that if we start down this road of tolling trucks and cars, that money that goes in transportation system from other sources will go different places from the general fund that goes into the transportation fund will not be transferred.
That's because transportation funds have been raided in the past.
Right. There's a track record of.
So, Marty, is that the reason you think?
But if I can, I think it's more than that. I think it also has to go to the history of promises the state has made to the public that have gone back. Lottery was going to be for education. Gambling, casinos were going to be for municipal aid. Raising gasoline tax was going to go to transportation. We're going to fully fund pilot. We're going to fully fund the ECS formula. The list goes on and on. Promises that were made not by Senator Looney and myself, but the legislature as a whole that never came true. So that lack of confidence and trust in government makes people say, I don't want to do that.
So what do you think, Marty, when you hear that?
Well, I think regarding transportation, we try to address that concern, and I think successfully so with the passage of the constitutional amendment regarding a lockbox, that any money we put in to the Special Transportation Fund can't be diverted out of it in later years. So the legislature still has discretion about how much it's going to put in on an annual basis, but once it's in, it's locked in. So we think that we've addressed that concern regarding transportation, and also the Democrats are certainly willing to try to build into the legislation any additional assurances that people want, that the intention is not to tax cars.
So,
in the
Len,
future.
is your view that people just feel like they'll find a way around it anyway? The way Malloy would just count some spending is not state spending, but off the books, so therefore it didn't exceed the constitutional cap?
Exactly.
All right, so let me give you a hard time about something, Len, okay? The bias I have on this is that it's hard to talk about taxes and trust in government because people get appealed to in a simplistic way so that you can't talk about it intelligently. You get everyone all mad, you're paying money, tolls, and taxes without, like on healthcare, you tell them, well, your taxes are going to go up to healthcare, and you can't bring up the point you're going to pay less money overall with government healthcare because your premiums are going to go down. Similarly with tolls, you can't say, you guys all want to be able to get to work. You guys all want to be able to not die when you drive over the new Miamis River Bridge. So we can either get out-of-staters to pay 40% of it, or we can find some other way that we just pretend we're doing other things that further makes us not trust government. Do you think Republicans have any responsibility, and conservative Democrats, in feeding that distrust of government by trying to push buttons at election time about taxes and tolls and not being able to talk intelligently, people like grown-ups, about the need to fund government?
So let me push back in a couple of things that you said. The premise is wrong on the healthcare. Government running healthcare is not going to lower healthcare. Government running anything hasn't lowered anything.
But private industry has screwed up healthcare more than
let me
it
tell
can
you,
be
private
imagined.
industry might have done not always the best.
I would
But
say
I
they're
would argue-
evil. Their whole business
I
model
would-
is to not give us the healthcare we pay for.
I would argue that trusting government with my healthcare, I would never do in a million years. We barely can trust them registering our cars. You try to call DSS right now, and you will be put on the phone for over an hour.
No, that's a
just
good
to
point.
get a question. So
why don't
now,
we make government work better when the private sector has failed?
Okay, now we're talking about something else, making government work better. I'll count you in on that one, and we could.
Because we are government.
That's a whole
Government's not
different
them. You're government.
No,
Marty's
government-
government. I'm government as a voter.
You got to let me at least finish the thought. I know you get excited
Sorry.
about this stuff.
Sorry.
But the thing is that government running these things as a monopoly gives you no choice. So when you call DSS, your choice is either wait an hour and a half on a phone for someone to pick up, and then you get put on hold and you're disconnected, you got to restart, which I hear all the time, or you forego your benefits.
And I agree with you totally.
Okay. So until government recognizes that people are clients and customers, right now I could have a choice to go to X insurance company, Y insurance company, or Z
Your
healthcare
point's well
insurance
taken, Len,
company.
but do you really have a
But
choice
I can't
when
do
all
that
those...
with government. I've got one choice when I go to that DMV line waiting for 3 hours: doing my business or not doing my
Point's
business.
well taken, Len.
Okay.
But what do you really have a choice when every single private healthcare company has a business model enabled by state regulation to try to take your money and not give you what they promised you get
So
when you
let's
need
look
it?
at-
They tie you up for weeks
So let's look at what
on
they
phone
want.
calls. You can't talk to a human being.
So let's look at, and then you could sit out there and say, I want to change my company. Or
But
you know
don't
what?
have another
Or
option.
wait, no, that's not true. There are a lot of different options out there. But I will tell you this, when they were going to do it with the comptroller of Connecticut, they were going to take it out of the insurance industry and eyesight. So therefore, the mandates that everybody wanted, remember, if you have a pre-existing injury, remember you can't discriminate based upon a health record and so forth. They wanted to be exempt from all that for Connecticut to run their own health care.
Okay, you and I
so
agree
they want to take the
health.
Okay, well, that's what they were talking about. So we talk about government running something was the idea the government wanted the best group to insure, driving policies down, driving the insured that takes a mix of a pool so that they don't have high premiums. We're subsidizing as taxpayers those premiums. The premiums go down. You chase the other businesses out. Now you got a monopoly left just with the state of Connecticut. That's not going to serve anybody.
Of course, a lot of the public plans are not monopolies. They have a public option. But in case, I think it's a fair debate, Len.
Okay, so that's a different show.
We disagree.
That's
but
a different show.
Points, but you're on point. You're saying that a lot of people just can't trust government to fix it. They feel that private industry do better or give you more choice. And from my point of view, private industry really has a form of monopoly or oligopoly that gives us no choice and takes advantage of us.
And I think that...
So the question is, do we make government run better or do we try to get private industry to do it better?
And I think private industry does it better in a number of regards. That's my view. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the tolls. I would argue yours is a false choice. I would say if we didn't have a solution on the table and the fear was having a status quo, then I would argue yes. But I could push back on a number of things that you've talked about. Number one, a lot of people feel if you want to get 40 cents out of someone else's pocket in Illinois, you're going to take 60 cents out of my pocket, so you get 40 cents out of their pocket.
But otherwise, you're taking $1 out of my pocket.
Can I just finish this whole thing? Number two, with trucks, what people don't know is trucks already pay for every mile that they drive. And something I just found out about 3 weeks ago, I'm embarrassed to say, but trucks also pay a certain percentage of gas based upon the miles that they drive. So they pay two things to the state of Connecticut, and every truck that goes through Connecticut pays it. So they're not free. Also, our gas tax, we get 74 cents back in every federal dollar that we pay on gas tax because we don't have tolls. Massachusetts is 33.
So you're saying we're going to give up some money from the federal?
Well, I don't know if we will give that up. I don't want to go quite that far because no one has said that.
But you want to look at that.
I just want to be clear that we are getting money from out-of-state drivers.
You're saying it's not simple. It's a complicated.
Exactly.
And we're talking to Len Fasano and Marty Looney about that. And Marty, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on what Len said.
About healthcare or tolls? No, only kidding.
Healthcare. You actually guys have united on some very interesting actions on healthcare.
And we've got more to come.
We have more to come. I think one of the themes of the 2020 session will be some more bipartisan healthcare legislation, such as we've worked on in the last several years since we first got together around the concern that we had about the large hospitals buying up physicians' practices and concern about facility fees being imposed. So we geared up about 5 years ago now to address some of that legislation. Right. Every year since then, we've had a consumer protection healthcare package that we've worked on ever since. And this past year, one of the ones we did was doing away with the insurance practice of denying coverage for an emergency room visit when somebody in good faith went there, for instance, with chest pain. It turned out not to be a heart attack, and some insurers were trying to deny coverage for that. And we've now prevented them from doing that. So I think we'll be coming forward again with some other things that our both that our chair, Matt Lesser of the Insurance Committee, and the Republican ranking member, Kevin Kelly, have been looking at. So I think we'll have a bipartisan package again this year.
All right, so let's get to that in the show. Let's talk about your bipartisan hopes for 2020. Let's talk about some of the questions Bob and Haji have sent in. But Marty, I want to finish up the toll question. What's going to happen next?
Well, I think in January, I think we are going to have a special session where we will try to pass the latest iteration, which is the very limited plan on tolling trucks only on bridges. And obviously, another component of the plan will be to try to attract federal transportation dollars at a lower interest borrowing cost than currently is available to the state with its own borrowing. And with those components, we'll get the package to address
of $19 billion. And is it mostly roads?
Over 10 years. It's mostly primarily roads, but it's also rail, and there's and for buses also. In terms of federal loans, the federal government will actually cover a bigger percentage of costs regarding rail than they will on roads and under some of those programs. So, and we think that obviously the rails need to be addressed as well, and as well as buses. I mean, we need to have the Connecticut Transit upgrade all of its bus schedules around the state, especially in the cities. Many
Well,
of them
we just spent
hopelessly
4
outdated.
years and $1 million to have the state government say that what New Haven asked them about buses 4 years ago was completely true. The system's broken. The routes make no sense. It's taken all that time. Are we ever going to see a day when there's a single press conference in New Haven from state government
I think we will.
saying we did something well?
I was
with
just
the
talking
buses?
with Representative Roland Lamar about that this morning, who's our House Chair of the Transportation Committee, and he said the new report that documents the changes necessary, and that's going to be one of the things we're going to push as part of the transportation initiative is
excellent.
an update on the outdated bus schedules, because as we know, commuting patterns have changed. In parts of New Haven, 40% of the census tracts have people who don't have cars that really rely on those buses to get to work, and that has to be updated.
All right, so Len Fasano, the Republicans have put together a plan. It does not include tolls.
Yes.
So you believe we can get to that $19 billion in a responsible way without tolls?
I get to 18.6.
Okay, so how are we going to get there under the Republican plan?
So we have about $2.7 billion in a rainy day fund as of, I'd say the surplus fund, as of July 1st. It is predicted that $358 million is going to go in based upon this thing called the volatility cap. So I have 2.7. If we use 1.5 of that 2.7, that still leaves 1.2 in that surplus should we hit a deficit year of significant outlook. Right now, we're showing a 2021 projection of another surplus, be it all volatility cap and other things, which would bring that number closer to $2 billion. So we would have a lot of money. And the idea is we're earning less than 1% or about 1% on those savings account, but we're paying a lot on pension plans on that borrowed account, if you would. So if we put $1.5 billion, and just like paying off your credit card, you pay off the pension debt, that loosens your money up. You take that money, you get it to the transportation fund through a step.
You mean you borrow based at a better rate now? Because
no, you're not borrowing at all. You're saving. In other words, we have a pension debt that's X. If I take $1.5 billion and pay it down like you pay down on a credit card, our monthly payments are less. So now we take those monthly payments and we use that to help fund
And how
cash.
much do those add up to, those monthly payments from the debt?
Now you got me without the.
But I mean,
plan of
I don't need the exact numbers, Glenn. Is this most
we
of
put
the?
we put in about $2 billion of cash into the transportation system. Most of that is this extra money.
So you're saying this would primarily fund it?
It funds without tax, without tolls.
Using
now,
the rainy,
kickback,
so just to make sure I understand, using the rainy day fund, $1.5 billion of it, to pay down pension debt, will free up money we would otherwise be paying year by year for pension debt. We'd use that instead, and you think that would be enough to fund the transportation repairs?
I know it's enough. I ran the numbers with OFA, Office of Fiscal Analysis. So it comes to 18.6.
Mm-hmm.
Some people kick back and say, well, we need the rainy day fund because what if there's a blah, 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 blah.
It's a fair argument, Lynn.
Well, not really.
It's a conservative argument.
Actually, not really. And here's why. Because over the past 7 years, the most we ever used the rainy day fund has been $1 to $200 million on the average. This year, we're using $30 million, for example, 2020. The only time we ever used a lot was in 2010. And the reason why we used like over $1 billion, 1.2 and then some, was because in 2008, we started to hit a recession. And the majority party refused to change the budget to say, we're in a recession. We got to change our spending habits. We got to curtail stuff. It was, no, let's wait. Because they knew they had the rainy day fund. They could suck it dry. So they waited. Governor Rell was on her way out, so she wasn't extraordinarily powerful.
I would use the word complicit.
She might have been
agreed to it. Let's
complicit,
be
but
fair.
clearly she didn't use her powers of the governor to get on a megaphone and say, stop the craziness. So he drove herself into a hole. So yeah, they did that.
But aren't you reversing roles
don't
now?
have-
Aren't you doing what
No,
the Democrats did in 2010?
Absolutely not. If you see a recession, we're usually the last to go in the recession. We're not the first. If you see a recession, don't forget, recession started 2008. We really didn't get hit till 2009, 2010. If we started to pull back in 2008, 2010, or before 2010, we would have not touched this rainy day fund as much as we did. That's number one. Number two is the fact that if you recognize that problem and manage it accordingly, you can solve a problem. And 2008 was an extraordinary time. Everybody related it to the 1929 crash. Now, let's be clear. The crash of the market took place overnight. This recession in 2008 took over 10 years to materialize.
And we saw it happening with the mortgages.
It was a slow drag down amount. Everyone saw it.
Except Lehman
but
Brothers
the
kind of
legislature
tipped it that one day.
Well, listen, it was a lot of bad actors. A lot of bad
No, I'm
actors.
talking about that one day when they went.
True. But there are a lot of bad actors in this thing, and it was a real estate issue. So it was money over time. You saw the foreclosure list growing here in New Haven. We all saw it was coming, but no one wanted to act. Now, could another perfect storm come? Absolutely.
Well,
but
we've had the longest
having $2 billion
economic expansion since the Great Recession. People think, how can we not be planning for another recession? Are you saying just the economy doesn't work the way it used to because of technology change and global finance?
I'm not going to predict the economy. I always tell people that business people I talk to, I think everyone's pretty much come to a reasonable conclusion for various reasons. Between now and November 2020, we won't hit a recession because politically it would be bad for those in office across the board. So maybe the first quarter, second quarter of 2021, you'll see a recession. Now remember, you start to see a recession, it gives us a full year in the legislature. Our fiscal year is half of that regular calendar year. So we should have about $2 billion plus in a rainy day fund. That's still an historic amount of money, still an awful lot of money to deal with a recession prudently. So I don't fear it.
Okay, what about you, Marty? I want to ask Marty on this, and thank you, Len. So, Len, the Republicans are saying, let's take $1.5 billion out of the rainy day fund. And am I right that the Democrats are saying, let's pay as we go by doing truck tolls because we need that money for when a recession hits? Do you agree with Len's math?
That's basically it. No, we are saying that we have struggled so hard to get that rainy day fund to a point where it is now at a level that that puts us in the upper tier of states with rainy day funds. And that is now drawing praise from the rating services, from Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Bloomberg News, and
right,
others.
Because Len, didn't the rating agency say last week, because we built up the rainy day fund, they say we've done better with handling finances, so we'll be able to borrow money cheaper because of that?
Sure. So here's the issue with that. Your credit rating agency is based upon not only what you have in the rainy day fund, but your debt. We'll be paying $1.5 billion in debt. And the toll thing, by the way, for trucks is not pay as you go. And I object to the way that you use that phrase.
But that was a rhetorical tack to make you look like a Republican who's not going by Republican
principles.
Yeah,
I know. That's the reason why I have to come back.
Yeah.
So under our plan, we borrow a lot less than Governor Lamont's Democratic plan on truck tolls. And we put in a lot more cash than the other plan. So we borrow less and we put in less and we put in more cash. Is he right?
Marty, why don't you agree with that?
I think it is important to preserve that rainy day fund until we get to 15%, and then we can start using it for some additional purposes.
What percent are we at now?
I think we're at 12 or 13 now. And the concern is, of course, that if we get hit by a bad recession as we did, even that substantial rainy day fund can be hit hard. So we want to be at the point where we can absorb a really bad recession and still have enough in reserve that we won't have to decimate state programs and services based upon the lessons we saw in 2008, 2009.
One thing when I step back at this again to give a bias to someone who's not in politics, I don't feel like you two are that far apart. I feel like when we say, are we going to toll everybody or not, that's a bloodbath. That's a mud fight. You're the top Democrat, Marty. You're the top Republican, Len. I'm not hearing a big split on this one. This sounds like this deal might be able to get done. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Well, the governor also has to be involved, so...
Really?
Yeah, well, usually.
That's not the sense I had either, but okay. You're listening to Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live streaming in fact. Let's get to a few questions. So Haji said, good morning, Senators. Should the legislature discuss the possibility of becoming professionalized, i.e. full-time? Oh boy, Len's going to love this one. So as to allow more people to serve, not just those who could take months off from work. He didn't use the word lawyers, but that's often what they are. What do you think?
Oh, they're not. First of all, if I might just say, the number of lawyers in the General Assembly has decreased substantially from what it was years ago. And I think, frankly, that's a problem. That's because of the conflict of interest rules and because the increasing amount of time the legislature takes, not only when we were in session, but in the rest of the year. lawyers just cannot sustain the idea of the demands of a private practice with having to be in Hartford. And
yet lawyers know law. So they're...
And yes, they have a freshman legislator who's a lawyer usually has a leg up on a freshman legislator who's not, just for that reason. But we have a much smaller percentage overall of lawyers serving in the General Assembly than was the case. In terms of professionalism, I think of going full-time year-round, I think that's something that the public probably doesn't support. But in reality, it is something that we're, in effect, moving to de facto with close to, at least for the leadership, something that's close to full-time for very much part-time pay.
What do you think? What is that part-time pay?
Well, it's the base pay is there's $28,000. There's an extra leadership stipend and then mileage reimbursement. But everybody is making under $40,000.
Really?
Yeah.
You guys make under $40,000?
Yeah.
Whoa.
And I think to Marty's point, it's well taken. Look, I don't care what he says. If you're in leadership and you're going to do the job right, that means be vigilant on the issues that you read about and see, and stay ahead of the issues. It is a full-time job. And then you complain about it, people say, hey, look, then don't run, right? That's the obvious answer. Mm-hmm. But if you want quality people who are going to put in the quality time and not run to a committee meeting, turn their sign around, leave the committee meeting, because then you're considered there, go home and do your job, right? And then, if there's no roll call.
Would you both favor doubling the pay, and that's a lot of money?
Well, let me just first of all, there hasn't been a pay increase for the legislature since the last one, I believe, was voted on in maybe 01, went into effect. You can't have the increase go into effect in the term in which you voted. So I think the term that began in 03 was the last time an increase went into effect.
And this is my bias, that it's impossible to talk intelligently about paying for things in government because people run for re-election or elections saying that person wants to tax you.
So it's about 18 years since there was an increase, right?
What do you think, Lynn? You were up for a raise?
I think that someone should, I don't know if I'll be around when all this happens, but I think someone should look at this issue on an independent basis, see what other legislatures are doing and how they do with it. Because obviously it's not a popular vote. The public doesn't like it. But if you want quality laws and you want people to really do the quality work as opposed to either knee-jerk or I'm going to see which way the wind is blowing, and when I get up there, let me see what my emails say so I know how to vote, I'm not sure that's necessarily always the right thing. You got to represent your district, but you also have to be very knowledgeable and understand what's happening as a flow in other states to get a better. That takes a lot of time. Now, look, as leaders, I know we put in the time an awful lot, and I know a lot of our cast around us put in a lot of time. But really, to do this right, you have to put in a lot more time.
Is it Nebraska that has a unicameral legislature? Could you save the money, the added money of paying you guys full time, with a unicameral legislature? Do we need the two houses the way Congress does?
Well, I think in Nebraska, interestingly, they went to a unicameral during the Depression in the 1930s. No other state has followed that model.
Yeah, why do you think that
Because I think it's not the best model. I think having the two chambers creates better legislation, creates the give and take, creates the vetting process, and I think it's more likely that you have a more rigorous process when there are two chambers.
And Marty, is that because you have two sets of eyes, or is it like the federal system where they felt that senators representing whole states and being there for 6 years have some kind of protection, according to the founders, right, from popular passions that change day to day, whereas the representatives who have smaller districts and get elected every 2 years are more responsive to the popular passions that change fast, and that strikes a balance.
Well,
does that really happen at the state?
Well, no, in our system, it can't happen quite that way because we have 2-year terms in the Senate as well as in the House.
And it's also small.
But it does give us a chance. We each represent about 100,000 people as senators. The House members represent about 24,000 people. But it does, the vetting process of having to get through two chambers does, I think, create a greater filter.
What do you think, Lynn?
I agree with Marty. As much as there's two senators sitting here and we're representing a very good chamber,
right,
I would argue that I think Marty's right. I think that the more vetting, the more voices, the better. Because sometimes things will pop out of the Senate, be on its way to the House, and all of a sudden there's an issue, and they'll catch it in the House and vice versa. Right. So a vetting process of that degree is important.
And it would be reasonable for the Senate to have a 4-year term, as most other states do. There are only a few states, mostly in New England, where the Senate has 2-year terms and the House has 2-year terms. Most states, it's 4 for the Senate, 2 for the House.
All right.
I second that.
All right. Len said he might not be around for that, which comes with Bob's question. Bob, thanks for putting a question. Is Martin running for re-election? And is Lynn going to run for governor? I wonder why that question wasn't flipped.
Maybe because we have a Democratic governor. Right?
Oh, that's right. What are you guys running for?
I'm running for re-election.
You will. Okay.
Yeah, and I 2022, right? That's when it is.
Yeah.
That's a ways off. So
No, 2020.
no, but for governor was the question.
Oh, right. So in other words, you're not
That's
answering that
2020.
question. So you might be putting your name in.
No, but, 2022 is a long way.
2020 hindsight, yeah.
Yeah.
Foresight. What about running for re-election next year, Lynn?
Yeah, a lot of decisions are made, and right now I'm leaning towards it, but a lot of decisions.
All right. So now we talked about the way you guys work together, that you respectfully disagree and you can still deal with each other on some of these big issues like tolls, although to me it didn't sound as big a gulf as some people might think. Healthcare, 5 years, you've been tackling questions like what happens when you don't get notified about what's in your bill, correct?
Mm-hmm.
About whether they get charged in the emergency room if you went there in good faith, about whether what happens when they buy your practice and you pay a facility fee, if I'm not mistaken. What do you got cooking in 2020 for bipartisan healthcare legislation?
Well, one of the things that I've talked to Marty's office about, he has a person, Dina Berlin, who's just excellent. She really has the pulse of the medical and insurance world, is sort of having a gatekeeper, and I mean it not in terms of insurance, but putting together folks who could help guide, funded by not-for-profits, who can help guide people through difficult medical decisions, not making decisions, but let them know what areas are open to them. And I forgot the technical name. A oncologist told me about it from Yale about 4 months ago, and I was going through something with my mom, and she happened to call me. And I talked to Dina about it. Dina did some research that she sent me maybe about 3 weeks ago. I haven't got my hands around it. And when I do, I think I want to talk a little bit more with Senator Looney about it and Dina about it. But what's missing is the complicated worlds, and I think that people just don't have enough time. It goes back to what you were talking about.
It's a job.
To sit with your doctor to explore all the different avenues. And there's so many procedures out there. I always say, my dad was a doctor, right, for family physician.
That's right, and at Westville on Whaley. Right?
That's right. So I have a respect for doctors that I can't separate between my father and a doctor. It's just, if a doctor told me, go paint your car red, it's going to make you feel better, I'd paint the darn car red. That's the way I am.
But you don't make laws based like that.
No.
Evidence.
But the point is, I think it's very hard to navigate the world of medical, and you need help. And states have done this, what Dina tells me. So I want to look at something like that and talk to Marty about some of those.
So one thing you're
issues.
talking about is to have guides. Who would pay for that?
We're talking about getting together with not-for-profits, maybe get some of the hospitals to chip in on this. I don't think it's going to cost a lot of money. Once again,
right.
Dina I gave it to her to take the lead on this, and I think she was looking into it, and I told her we'd get together after January 1st.
Anything else, Marty, you got on your radar?
Well, I think we also want to explore, again, looking at issues related to the cost of prescription drugs and try to find some ways to deal with that if we can at the state level.
How do you guys feel about importing from Canada? Does that have to be federal legislation?
That's one. I think we can. We had the insurance committee looked at that last year, and I think there's broad-based support for authorizing that to happen. And I think that's one way to drive down those costs.
And you're okay with that, Lynn?
Yes.
You'd go on the Bernie Sanders bus to Canada, this little joke here.
Or Uber.
Any other thing else on healthcare? What about the big question of public options and expanding the Obamacare in Connecticut and Medicaid? Where are you guys on that? Are you on different sides on that one?
Well, I would support a public option. I think that it's a way to try to carve out a plan that might be low cost. Again, it would have to be run by private insurers, but it would be put out to bid by the state. So it would be there would be state mandated components of the plan, but it would be open to bid by private insurers.
And Lynn, there's some concerns about government will just make it worse?
Yeah, I'm not big on the public option. I will say I think that the chairs and ranks are looking at reinsurance funding for help offset.
Tell me about that.
The cost of premiums. Well, apparently the chairs and ranks are having good discussions about setting, I think, $25 million aside to help fund folks with lower income, their premium assistance. The other way was the tax policies. That healthcare policies. That didn't make a lot of sense. So they're looking at another avenue, which is to have reinsurance pool where you can get some help in lowering the
Your
insurance
premiums.
Yeah, and I'm not clear on all the details. I know it's really nice.
So you
the
open to the
chairs and
concepts.
ranks.
You open the concepts.
Yep.
Okay,
And there'll
Manny.
be pushback from some folks in the building.
And
but-
also, Paul, I think that's going to be important to look at. Another thing an issue that came to our attention last year was that many hospitals are imposing what are called trauma activation fees. So when the trauma unit hospital has to be activated, there's a fee, and those fees are currently unregulated. So we now, as part of the bill that we passed last year, the bipartisan bill now is going to require those hospitals to disclose, to the state exactly when those trauma fees are imposed and how much they are, because at the very least we need to know what they are to know whether we should be regulating them. I think that's become a new unregulated profit center for hospitals that we need to know about and to and impose some accountability on.
All right, and you want to push
agree.
back on some.
No, I think that's
Before
great.
that, you said you wanted to push back on something in the building. I think you were talking about the legislature.
I don't remember.
That's okay, but you'll think of it because
Yeah.
I promised you it's 2 against 1 on some of these issues. So we got to make sure everyone gets a fair shake here on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM live stream, newhaven.org. We got the 2 leaders of the state senate, the Democrat who runs the joint, Marty Looney, and his partner in non-crime, Len Fasano, the leading Republicans. Manny Acevedo says every state has increased almost continuously every year or so, making it more and more expensive. Trucks' cost will be passed on to us, and everything we purchase also be a matter of time. All right. Well, thanks, Manny. And Silvana Apicella says Connecticut needs to stop mismanaging our money, period. Stop taxing the working class, no tolls. Connecticut trucking industry pays $280 million per year in state and federal taxes. What about Tweed New Haven Airport? You guys are on the same side of that one, correct? You both represent constituents in East Haven/New Haven.
Right, I represent the New Haven side. Len represents the East Haven. Yes.
Now, you both have opposed increasing the runway. So the business leaders, some of whom were often backers of yours, it's a jihad for them. They think that if you just can have a longer runway, we'll have more flights in and the economy will boom. People who live in the neighborhood say, you promised us in 2009, you signed a deal. You said this is the last time we're ever going to expand the runway.
We
now
passed
you're
a
going back on
statute
it.
that people could rely on from that point
and now
on.
there's a
Right.
lawsuit that's working its way up to, I guess, maybe the Supreme Court, if they'll kind of hear it, about whether that can be overridden. Where do you guys stand on that now, and are you on the same team?
I think we're pretty close. I'll start. Back in February, Len and I, along with Representative Al Paolillo and Vinnie Morrow from my staff, and the governor had one of his staff members there, met to talk with him about Tweed. He said at that point he was committed to Tweed development, that he saw it important for economic development for the southern part of the state. He was getting a lot of pressure, he said, from Yale New Haven Hospital, from Yale University, from the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, and from the shoreline towns. And he was interested in trying to find a way to make that happen. He knew that the city of New Haven had never followed through on a community benefits plan to deal with the concerns of the neighborhood. He said, I would like to take that on and develop a process to go to the community with that plan and try to find a consensus that would then allow us to go forward. And also going to be willing to put in a lot of state money as well as looking for money from the hospital, from the university, from the business community, and also from the towns and the regional COG. By the end of the session, frankly, we hadn't heard anything more on that. That all sounded very good to me anyway. By the end of the session, we hadn't heard anything more. And what we did hear finally was that instead of that plan, there was now a new plan to look at Tweed and Sikorsky and see which of those would be the better option.
My understanding is that you
Connecticut.
can't really look at Sikorsky, right? I mean, just physically as a landscape, it can't work as that kind of airport. Am I right about that?
I don't think so.
What, that I'm wrong or I'm right?
You're wrong.
Oh, you can look at Sikorsky. So you think that could work, and maybe that's closer to White Plains, so we kind of get that market. So you'd like it to see it be a Sikorsky?
No, I think that, look, in fairness to folks around Sikorsky who are not a real fan, but Sikorsky's run by Bridgeport, who doesn't care about the people of Stratford. That's the rub, is that Sikorsky is owned by, or Stratford Airport is owned by folks in Bridgeport. And when Stratford folks complain about this, that, and the other thing, they don't care. Bridgeport doesn't care about the people in Stratford. So there's some benefit to them to have someone who may care about them. But
So you're saying have the state come in and run the joint?
right. But I think you need to look at what is the impact economically, which one's going to pose the benefit.
And what do you think?
And the reason why I'm confident in that report is I believe that it's going to show that folks from Fairfield are going to support Stratford if they want to go to Florida or whatever hub rather than going to LaGuardia or Kennedy or White Plains, which is a nice
Maxed out.
airport.
White Plains
but
maxed out.
they're maxed out, and you try to get there to Christmas and New Year's, you can't get any parking. So I think that this is a viable airport economically because you're going to steal a large share of the marketplace. Where Tweed, perhaps you steal some of Bradley, and there's some concern that the Bradley airport traffic.
Well, we need to improve transportation to Bradley, like that last mile when you go on the train to Windsor Locks and that kind of stuff. And and if planes come in after 7 o'clock, you're a dead duck if you don't have a car.
And I think what they're doing is they're getting a train from Hartford. Part of this transportation plan is a train from Hartford to Bradley, vis-a-vis something or another. I know that they were talking about that. That's part of this transportation plan. To help
So, Marty,
ease.
you would land on you'd rather see Sikorsky be the airport?
No, I would rather see Tweed, but I would rather see Tweed with a viable community benefits plan that doesn't sacrifice.
So you'd like to see a longer runway.
But what I would like to see, first of all, and this is something actually Mike Lawler, who was then the rep from East Haven, endorsed about 10 years ago, but it would involve a significant buy-in from East Haven. I think that given the configuration of the airport, I think the terminal should be moved to the East Haven side. The approachway should be through Hemingway Avenue in East Haven and Commerce Street, which is already a commercial area. The residential streets in New Haven leading into the airport are just too narrow. They can't really support enhanced airport traffic, and I think financial incentives would have to be provided to East Haven were that to happen to make it worth their while.
But East Haven would never go for this, would they?
Well, I don't know, but I think that's up to the state then to try to make it worth their while if they were to accept that. I think it also means that you'd have to finish all of the soundproofing that there's supposed to be 180 houses or so. The soundproof between New Haven and East Haven. They've done about 45, I think, right, so far.
I think that's right. That's it. Yeah. But I would also say you said that Len was against Tweed expansion. I think what I said was I think they should do an analysis, economic, to determine where is the state going to get its biggest bang for the buck. Putting money into Tweed, what's that economic yield? Putting that money into Stratford, what's that economic yield? I know that Dave Stubberman, way back when he was running for governor, did such a study. Yeah. But I think Governor Lamont may have that study. I don't know for sure.
Well, he wanted to privatize it, Stubberman. That was his idea.
He wants to privatize it. And let me tell you, every airport in Europe is privatized.
So you've heard the two really hard line views on both sides of this issue. There's that religious belief of this community, even though we've had so many failed airlines come in doing service that then leaves and we didn't have it. They say next time when we can expand it, we're going to get a lot more business. That'll be jobs. The neighborhood says that we're not even going to have an airport in 50 years. It's all going to be underwater. It's already a lot of pollution there. It doesn't build up the economy. The thing can't viably run on its own. And then other people say, well, you move next to an airport. It used to have more flights. If you move next to an airport, you can have an airport. You can have planes. On that larger view, who's right? There's a neighborhood, a bunch of NIMBYs who knew they were building next to an airport, or is a business community, a bunch of people who ignore evidence that don't care about climate change?
Well, I think the neighborhood is reasonable in its concerns, and the more recent one is the one regarding climate change and flooding in the area. But there is, I think, a path to finding a way to make Tweed a more viable airport because it did have more flights in the past, and it was not severely disruptive of the neighborhood then. But you have to make sure that if you look at that neighborhood as one of the most stable residential neighborhoods in the city, pays a lot of property taxes. It's mostly owner-occupied homes. It's one of a handful of truly stable middle-income neighborhoods in the city that is the backbone of residential living in the city. And there cannot be a plan that's going to somehow destabilize property values in that area. And if there is, what happens is maybe there's a benefit to the overall region because of the airport, but it would be a devastating blow to the city of New Haven because the property values decline in East Shore and New Haven. New Haven would never make that up in airport revenues, although it would be a boon to the region.
Final
word goes to Len Fasano.
I agree with everything Marty would say, and I would just add this. I mean, Yale and Yale Hospital talk about the need for this. I don't know why they're not pitching into New Haven to help them fund this airport. They have the money. If it's important, why not? And if the state does do it, I hope that Yale does pitch in so they put their money where their mouth is.
You mean for the expansion?
For the expansion, yeah, sure. Why should we bear it all if it's a great benefit to them, they argue.
All right.
As well as the suburban towns, on a per capita basis, there are more users of the airport than there are New Haven residents.
All right. Well, it's always such a treat to talk to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for having
coming
us.
to the office
Thank you,
of
Paul.
Dateline New Haven. I love talking to Martin Looney, Len Fasano, two people who show that in these Very divisive political times. You can have different views on some issues and still work together as gentlemen and run our government. I hope that 2020 is another year like that for you guys. And
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for listening. Thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, WNHA station manager Harry Droz. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.